I can't restate that. But the whole idea, instead of populating or polluting the global app space with more methods, define a dialog module with interfaces that provide those same things that we're showing earlier. So thank you, that's a great idea. And again, whether it's the model view controller code or how to access parameters to fulfill feeding information to the dialog boxes, there's all sorts of ways of doing those things in Xojo. But I think that's a brilliant way of even better making it available not only to the one app you're working on, but future apps that you're working on. So excellent, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, let's get going into the more advanced sections. Again, this is about 30 minutes of time. And we, again, talked through the essentials earlier. Sorry about the reminders, I just like to do it. We went through a simple message box. We tailored the look of the dialog box. We also created a basic model view controller framework regarding how you would handle information passing and handling within the dialog box. So, just to remind you, that happy picture, that's how it all works. With the model being the local data, the view being actually accessing the elements that the user sees, and of course the controller basically handling all the negotiation between from the model and to and from the view. So, on the advanced topics, the interactive modal dialog box is what I wanted to show you all. Some interesting ways to do it. You could advance the look in the dialog box, implement platform-specific nuances, dynamically update the controls, and also pass and return information to the caller. We haven't returned any information back up the chain yet, so let's talk about that. This is, once again, an example of that Adobe Photoshop dialog. And for those of you that use Adobe Photoshop or any Adobe products, those dialog boxes can be hairy. And they can do a lot of things, and all of a sudden you realize, my God, how did I get to this point? Cancel, go back into the dialog box. One example here is if you change the resolution, some of you can't see it, sorry about that. If you change the resolution, whoops, down there to from 144 pixels to 288, you actually, the dimensions and other fields automatically change instantly once you put in that information. And that's more complicated to do than you think in order to keep all your code straight. This again is that example of showing the flow between the caller and within the dialog box. The model view controller stuff, but it can get a little bit more complicated in that the event handling gets in, where events are triggered and then you have to methodically keep track of everything. And for those of you that have experimented with dynamic controls and updating other controls, that can be a tough ride, at least it was for me. This is an example of a dialog box, a pretty simple one, but that it will have a list box up on top with several options, and then an email address, and then a checkbox saying that you acknowledge, kind of like a simple-minded dialog box, but there's a lot going on to this, and as soon as you would hit OK, the OK button, which on the left of Windows and on the right on Mac OS, they're reversed, as you know. That's when you'll get messages. This is one way of interacting with the user when there is expected user-like input. You could handle it instantly, or you could wait till someone hits OK, then you tell them. So this is one way to do it. And once again, once you would select all that information, meaning the dialog box would be complete if you have selected a level from beginner experienced to advanced, in this case. Again, you always have one selected regardless. And then you have an email address, and then you have to have that checkbox. So that's how that would work. So and then you would return that information, not the fact that the acknowledgement checkbox, that's not important to return. You had to do that in order to properly dismiss the dialog box. But you would return to the caller the information about which level they had selected and their email address. And in this case, in this example, we're actually showing what was returned on the main WinMain. So let's go through an example. As you can see, there's a lot of these around here. Okay, here we go. So if I hit the go button, you guys probably want to see this. There is that screen that we're going to fill out. By the way, if I hit cancel, the caller knows that you hit cancel. So let's go in here. Fill this out. We can change this to advanced. And as I click that advanced, as you can see, the event triggered, and I went ahead and put some additional information, the expert user who doesn't require any training, as a static text. That wasn't there before. And then we do an email. Like that. And then let's hit OK. Oh, you need to acknowledge it before you can dismiss it. And let's do something else. Let's get rid of that .com. Let's hit OK again, and now it says the email is invalid. So you all get the idea of what's going on here. And then you hit OK, and all that stuff comes on back. And what's interesting about this is I want to show you all, well, we can actually, boy, all that rumbling up there. Okay. Is that what the wow. Okay, so here are the methods as the get email, get level, get return status within the dialog box. There is, oh, by the way, sorry, let's start over. One, which is at the bottom here, the properties. We have added more properties to hold the information that the user types in. Now the checkbox, where you acknowledge, you're not going to return that to the user. You can always query the checkbox control, and that's how we've left it in the case of this example. You may choose to do something like that differently. We have some, so we've expanded this with more values. We have also put in logic in the load UI and unload UI that wasn't there in the prior examples. And we've identified some more, we've added a few more helpers. One helper is called get I approve checkbox. In other words, tell me by returning a true if that checkbox is checked. And then helper OK, that when you hit OK, it basically does all of the logic there. And then helper set I approve checkbox if you want to set that, if you want to force setting that. So all these helper, and there's one more, is valid email. That's kind of a verifier that you go and then check to see, make sure that the email address is a valid one. All pretty standard stuff. And as you can see, I just wanted to redisplay. There's a lot going on, but it's still very organized in terms of how it works. Again, the first thing, and I want to remind you all, that arrow is pointing the wrong way. So when the function starts, you save all the past parameters in. You'll then initialize with the load UI, local member function, from what was passed and any other information that you need up to the user interface. This is typically the static information. You get that out of the way. And that also goes with, for example, setting the background color or anything else. And then you go through your event handling, which is all the responding to as a controller would within the code. And then at the very end, when the user hits cancel or OK, the dialog is dismissed. And in the case of the user hitting OK, the caller calls two getters to get the information back from the dialog box. And at that point, that dialog box is dismissed. So that's basically the ordering of progress. And again, this is a table view of all those functions that I just told you all about. So here's an example of what happens. And I'll bring that up a little bit. Those buttons on the upper side are the upper part of this diagram. That's the OK button. And obviously there's a right and a left one, and it's different per operating system. You have the action when the user clicks that button. And if it's the OK button, and that's what this diagram is showing, you call automatically the helper OK. Well, the helper OK function does, it immediately unloads any information that is still in those text boxes or selected, saves it in the model local properties, and then at that point verifies if those fields are valid with those helpers that I showed you. And then it either self-closes or it invalidates it and displays those like error messages underneath where the problem is. And that's basically what is going on. So again, that's what was being displayed. That was what was used, the code, like originally in our real simple dialog box that we did at step 2. Now, it is a little bit more complicated. And what it's doing is it's basically invoking that dialog box. Again, we're using that description to make sure it's not already called and not visible. And then it goes down and does the display as a modal dialog box. And then once it returns, it verifies if it's true. And if it's true, that means everything, as far as the dialog box assumes, is valid. And then it returns, and that's when you would call the two getters. The get level, which is that beginning experience advance by a number, 1, 2, or 3. And then you would get the email. And at that point, you would dismiss, which means that dialog box and all of its local properties are no longer available to you. Does that make sense? And I don't know if we really need to go through a code walkthrough on that, but maybe we should. You know what would be more fun is just to go to the next example, is this. Let's do it differently than waiting to tell the user that they have wrong information. Let's go right ahead and disable the OK button until the right information is entered. That's probably more usable from a user perspective. I see a lot of nodding heads, so that's the proper way of doing it.
I've had customers have a disabled button and they don't know what to do because there's no clue on the screen that anything is missing.
Have you considered finding new customers? I didn't mean that, but I couldn't help saying it.
That's good. I think I'd like to validate on the OK, show them the problem.
then the first example is just perfect.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Oh, then we can end and go to the local coffee shop, all of us.
Yeah, I think his approach is, because I've had lots of customers tell me this button's disabled, right? You know, so whereas if you leave it and they click it, maybe it'll say, well, you're missing this. So it kind of guides them to
Yeah.
what they need to do. And they fix that and they click it again, so now you're missing this.
So the tactile response, the question is that maybe the way we showed it earlier for some applications is much better, because for those users that struggle with disabled buttons, and I know what you mean with that, they really would like to hit the OK button every time and be told what exactly is wrong. And it's all up to you all, but that's the one we showed just now. Yes, sir?
So I try and make my UI as intuitive as possible. And what I do is I think, how would my mom try and figure it out? And that has helped a lot. And one of the approaches, rather than disabling button, if I don't want the user to have access to it, I'll just completely hide a button.
It's gone?
It's not even visible on the screen until they've done whatever action needs to be done, and then new things appear that they can interact.
So you're, which part of the country are you from? Oh, not Canadian. Well, the guy behind you is, Phil.
There might be a difference between what people expect on the web and what people expect in native apps. In native apps, disabling the button okay until it's good. Typically, you can have a tooltip that will explain why.
Right.
Whereas on the web, if you misfill the information, you press OK, you get some error like you forgot to enter your email.
That's a good point, Phil. That's a good point.
Just a difference of perspective.
So the point is there's a difference possibly between how users expect a web app to work versus a desktop app. And your idea that I wanted to just to restate was for your mom's sake or other users, they don't even want to see the button until they can actually hit it. And by that point, that's a fascinating approach. But as you can see, there's all sorts of ways of managing the dialog box when you have like interactivity. Anyone else have any thoughts regarding what works with their apps? Who said that? Oh, okay. How do you get users to read the dialog box? I don't know. Yeah, that's a good point. They call anyways, right? I don't understand what...
I get emails all the time with a picture of the error message saying, I don't know what to do. And so I'll just send them back an email message with the text from the dialog box.
Oh, this is what you do.
It says right
Wow.
there, press this button.
Right, right.
It's a modal.
Yeah, they're stuck. Modal. Yes, yes, sir.
So again, getting back to the example of what would my 85-year-old mother do with this dialogue box?
Now she's 85?
What I found for my users, honestly, is you've got to keep the messages extremely short. People will read them if they're short, and you've also got to keep them as simple to understand as possible. You can't use engineering versions at all.
That's a very good point.
It's got to be very kindergarten.
And that's hard for us as programmers because we want to get into a little bit more detail to help them. And yet what we're really confusing.
Or we want to give them exact errors that you know, right? As opposed to
Right.
There's a different school of thought between an error message dialogue and then some of the things you're doing in the dialogue you're doing.
True, true.
We really need to classify what we're doing as to how complex and whether things should be enabled or disabled and that type of thing.
Right, that's a good point. I've seen application, the point was that you, depending on the usage, you need to be very, what you don't want to do is in some dialog boxes have different behavior than others. And I've seen some apps that do that where they'll actually forget that in some dialog boxes, they'll inform you instantly. Others, you have to hit the OK to get it. So it ends up being a little bit confusing. But okay, very good points. Thank you. So we're going to show the next one on the disabling the OK button and verifying it, and once you verify it interactively, the OK button automatically becomes visible to the user to click. Another one is the what I would call the Alt option reset. And this is really interesting because if, let's say, you have gone through on a dialog box and you have entered all sorts of information and you've got yourself to a point that you don't like where the values that are there. And those are usually cases where a dialog box has changed its values based on some of the input that you've put in, that you can reset it back to the default. And this is a technique that some application users, some application developers use, that if you press the Alt or the Option key, the cancel button changes to reset. You release it, and then all of a sudden it's back to cancel. So that's an interesting way to go about doing that. So we'll show that too. Okay, with the disabling of the OK button, this is what it would look like is that you would, I could show that again, sorry about that. Okay, once you fill out all of that, the proper information, the OK button becomes highlighted there. And if you look at the Xojo code, all of those highlighted, functions, those are the ones that had to change to make this happen from the prior example that we showed. So there's small changes. What's interesting is to change the way that it worked last time to this, where the OK button becomes like enabled, took just 15 minutes. The Alt option reset, if you can see all the highlighted methods, functions that had to change to handle this guy over the prior version, there were several changes, and it's a good thing to always check on both platforms as early as possible, because one of the things I was hoping is that when you press the Alt key, there is a function in Xojo where you can get, you can check, you'll get triggered if the Alt, if a system key changes. It didn't work on Windows, so what I had to do was to put a timer on the keyboard that once a second, and that could be configurable, would actually check to see if the Alt button is down or the Option button is down at that point, and then resets it when it's not. So that's a trick that I learned the hard way. That took about 1 hour or so to change it, so that would work.
I think the problem you've got is that looking for whether that key is pressed has got different conditions on Windows, so you just about have to look for it in the window and in each one of the controls.
That window has to be the focus. Yes, that's right.
So if you press the Alt key while you're in the email, if it's looking for the Alt key, you can invoke it.
Right. Okay, that's good. Okay, and so as you can see, or hopefully you all can see, this is what the dialog box will look at without the Alt or Option key being depressed. And this is what, when it is depressed, it switches to, and when you release the key, it goes back to cancel. So it's kind of a trick, but on the other hand, if you have very complex dialog boxes that gets a user in trouble, and they just want it back the way it was instead of canceling, this is a interesting technique. So let's go into 05A. So this is the first one, and I'll bring this up. Okay, so I clicked the Go button. The OK button is disabled, And then I can change the level, and as you can see, as soon as I change it, this value change, the static like information label changes. And then right here, I have a email address. And isn't that interesting? Where did that one come from? Well, this morning, and by the way, don't change code at the last minute before you present. That was, I ran it earlier. If I hit I acknowledge button, checkbox, sorry, it still doesn't come up. And if I come in here and put, oh, I know. He's a hero of mine. So Jethro Bodine, and all of a sudden, as you saw, there's no flicker, there's no performance impact, obviously, but all of a sudden it comes back and it looks for, that looks to be valid, clicks, sets OK, it returns back, and now I get the status back by the caller. You clicked OK, experience level selected, and the user's email is whatever. You go back into this thing. Uh-oh. Sorry. So you go back into it, and it automatically, when the dialog box like initialized with the init UI, it unchecked this, I acknowledge, but it did pass the last level that we had selected, and it did pass that, the last email. So you have a head start. That makes sense? And the way that that works is, okay, good. Those other routines that were put in there, and again, this will be available for download. This is the code. And by the way, one of the things I do is that when I start a dialog box processing with a Win display, I automatically set a flag that the dialog box is not totally up and running yet. And once I go through the init UI and the load UI and set all that stuff, the background colors, at the very end, before the dialog box is actually displayed, I'll turn on, I'll set the MF dialog like initialize flag. I've seen some cases on timing, especially if you're running an app in Dropbox and some other things, where I've seen where all of a sudden the dialog box gets displayed before the code has actually completed running. So maybe that's an old, real basic issue that from way, way back. But anyways, that's just something that I've stuck with over time. And then the methods and the property, there's a lot of properties for each of those guys. Well, not a lot, but there's those. And then, as you can see, this is the helper logic that would be called if by calling is filled out, which is a new verifier local to the dialog box, if the email is right and the checkbox is selected, it then enables the OK button based on which operating system, and that's what that flag is used for, which, if the right button is the OK button. Pretty simple. And if you look at the is valid, it's pretty simple logic, and it probably isn't too accurate, but it basically is looking for the @ sign and a dot sign in there, just to make sure. Yours would be a lot better code. Load the init UI. Look at all this stuff. It's gotten a little complicated, but there are more fields in this thing, and there's more color choices, and the text, if I look at the dialog box, it's got Z's all over the place with regard to text that needs to be replaced with whatever language you're using. And again, you could use Lingua, you could use all sorts of techniques, but this whole idea of making sure that you have a truly translatable product is really important. And then the unload UI, basically, whenever you call the unload UI, look how simple this is. You get the I approve checkbox value. You get the, you store locally the email and the list index from beginning, experience, and advanced. You save it, and then one final thing after you unload, you basically say, can I enable the OK button? And this helper function, as I showed you all earlier, does either. It either disables the OK button or it enables it. So you can see how compartmentalized this logic is. And that's how it runs. And like I said, the other idea, the other option is to do the Alt button. And I'm not going to go through that as far as code-wise, but it's very similar except for the addition of the logic to see if that Alt button is pressed or not. And what I can do is run it. Let's run it. Oh, it is running. There it is. Sorry. Had it all queued up. So, whoops. If I hold down the Alt button, Option, sorry. It changed. Did you all see? Oops. Did you all see that? If I hold down this, ta-da, it resets. And what it will do is it will reset up above all that stuff to the way it was. So let's see if it works. I'm sweating this one right now. I just changed that thing. And let's change this to advanced. And I'm going to reset it. It was advanced before, sorry. But it changed it back to the original email that it had saved when the dialog box started out. Pretty simple. And then it will let me dismiss it like that. And that's how that works. Okay. The last one is the all-in-one modeless and modal dialog. This is pretty wild. I always wondered how status, like for example, startup screens and the about boxes, except for maybe putting a user license number, was the same. I thought, why not combine that logic into one? And they've done is have added a segmented control in the WinApp main logic to select between modal and modeless. Introduce a new modality flag so that to be used within the dialog box so it knows whether it's acting on a modal situation or modeless. And enhance the WinDisplay public method and add timer control. And now that's the cool part. So if you look at the way the logic used to be, that's basically how a modal dialog box runs. And a modeless, of course, is that the dialog box is displayed, but control returns immediately back to the caller. And at that point, the dialog box is running, and in this case, we put a timer on it so that after X seconds, it will actually dismiss itself automatically. Same overall code. Whoops. That's what the new Win main looks like. And what happens is, as the modeless, and when it's running modeless, as you can see right here, it will actually show dots, and as it's counting down, the dots are decremented every second. And what's good about this is we've added some logic in here that you don't have to wait for the countdown. If you click on the modeless dialog box, it will immediately dismiss. just like you would expect with a startup screen. So you would click to dismiss it before it's done. And that's, again, how that would work. So I want to show you all how that works. Okay, it's up and running. So here's the modal. You all have seen this before. I think I'll bring this up again. I like this feature. Okay, so I don't like that part. Okay, so this is where, from the modal, you've seen how this works. No big whoop. Experience a.b.com, and then we acknowledge it, all based on the original logic, and then, of course, it displays what you did. Now, let's change that to modeless. Now, what's going to happen is you're not going to have in a modeless dialog necessarily those user text fields, although you can, or those user selectable fields. In this case, what I've done is I have basically, where is it? Uh-oh, it came over here. Okay, I'm going to bring that up again. Sorry about that. Modeless. There it is. So it's displaying it. It counted down and it goes away. I'm going to do that again. Again, it's displaying. It's displaying the information. It's counting down, but I'm going to click on it, and before it counted down, it dismissed itself. Any questions about how that operates? It's the same code. Oops, what am I doing? So, let's bring this up. Okay, here's the code. There's quite a few changes. Look at that layout. It's a mess, and I apologize for it. But a lot of these things, when you initialize, you understand at the start whether it's modal or modeless, and you would then remove some of these fields. But the beauty about doing something like this, if you have like information that is basically the same from a like interactive modal dialog box as well as a modeless dialog box, why recode it twice? You don't have to. So we put all the logic in here. This is totally unviewable, but as you can see, what happens when you start out, you're passed the information here of the level, that beginning advanced experience list item. You're past the email address that was previously used, which starts originally as null. You have a title, and then you have the modality where the default is modeless, modal as number 1, and modeless would be number 2. That's pretty simple. But what's happening is, as you go down here, you're doing the same stuff as we did before. You're like initializing the UI, loading the UI. But in this case, you are doing, based on whether it's modal or modeless, you're doing two different things. If it's modal, you will basically do the show modal function. If it's modeless, you'll just do the show, which means the control returns right back to the caller. And that's all there is to it. The magic is in the init UI, which got complicated. And what it's doing is, depending on whether it's, as you can see, whoops, that didn't work. Sorry about that. Okay. Depending on whether it's modal or not, you can see it's turning on and off controls on that user interface, on that dialog box. So if it's modal, if it's modeless, you can see that it's turning on and off different things. In the case of it being modeless, which is this one right here, all these guys, it's not only turning off some stuff, It's basically setting up the splash counter, and off it goes. You don't need that for the modal, as you can see down here below. And that's it. And then if you look at the control handling, the event handling, aha, we've added something here, which is the mouse down, the mouse up, which if you click the mouse and it's modeless, it'll close, it'll dismiss that dialog box. That's all there is to it. We added a new helper. I kind of like using helpers, as I'm sure you all do, just to segment code, so in case you have other ways to invoke that same dialog box dismissal. And in this case, what it will do is it will return OK and dismiss it, so you can call it again and close it up. I realize there's a lot of code in this, but it's as we went through this at the first session and built this code up, it's all built on the same stepping stones as that. Any questions about those two different ways of really putting advanced features in a dialog box? Okay, I showed you that, so you saw how filled up that is in terms of the user interface elements. Also the difference between calling within the dialog box, whether it's modal or modeless. And again, this is the highlighted piece of what you would do differently when within the dialog box when you invoke it. You immediately save the modality, and then you either show modal or do the show function, and that's it. Pretty simple. So we've gone through from the simple message box through the model view controller all the way to complicated user-like interactions between controls within a dialog box, different ways, 3 different ways of doing that. Coupled, and finally, the craziness of them all is to, within one dialog box code, either doing modal or modeless. Any questions? Yes, sir.
So there's some really good tips in here for doing a more unified way of approaching dialog boxes. But in most cases for just error messages or quick messages, I use the built-in Xojo message dialog.
Right.
It auto calculates how many lines you need based on what your
Right.
description is. The only thing you can't do is change the color of the window.
Right.
But everything else you can set within it, just like these.
Yeah.
And so that begs the question, how are you addressing things like auto-sizing the dialogue and auto-sizing the text areas? And, you know, are you counting characters? Or are you putting the string somewhere and measuring it?
Yeah, well, that's not in this presentation. The question is, how do you handle resizing in the dialogue? Yeah, that is a whole third topic, I guess. But no, I did not cover that. I have in the past where I've basically looked at how much text is there and recalculating the size of the dialog box when it starts. What techniques have you all used for that? Or do you have dialog boxes that, depending on the content, like adjust in size?
Well, that's really, I mean, given that you've got support in here for language, that's really important. For example,
Yeah.
Spanish tends to be a bit longer.
Right. German, yeah.
And I don't want to think about that.
Right.
So that's really an important issue.
It is. It is. Well, that's a good idea for another presentation to show how to do that. Okay. Thank you. That's a very valid thing. I know when I've experimented with struts and stuff with other languages like Java and all, everything is just shiftable, it seems like. It's pretty cool. So any other comments on the question regarding resizing based on the content of your dialogue? That's a really valid point. Yes, sir.
Personally, I use Canvas, so I can check the height on the text.
Right. By using Canvas, yes. Right, right. Right.
New graphics, and then use that object, put the string in it, get the length back, and then extinguish that object without having to use the canvas somewhere off.
So the user doesn't even see that as you're calculating it.
It's actually a buffer, you know.
Yeah. That's sharp.
Draw the string into and calculate the length,
Okay.
and that you can extend the string class. That's one of the functions. The string assistant class you can extend with a method called string dot length, and in that extend method you can put this graphics object in, and then you can feed any string into it and come out with its length in, I guess, whether it's pixels or, and then you can use that to calculate the height of a box, and then
Right.
now language independent.
Right. Oh, that's great. I don't know about you all, but I was glad to hear on Wednesday that string you won't go to hell for using it. Because I was really debating whether to go down that route and do all that conversion, because I knew that was the right thing to do, but I never did, so this was great news. Yes, sir.
Another comment, in Modal view control, the caller is in charge of the data. In other words, it
Right.
has the model thing.
Right.
And in your dialog box, you're creating custom getters. And I wonder if another strategy would be to just have one getter called get data and wrap it in a dictionary.
Sure.
So no matter what caller you have, the caller can decode the dictionary because it's in charge of the
Right. Right. And you could be data type independent within that dictionary. The point was, rather than having specific getters, is to use a more generic one like the module approach that you brought up earlier, and provide that in a dictionary structure. That's smart. Yes, sir.
I like to keep things together, and so I wondered if I could make a dialogue like you made that would know to display itself or not. And what I ended up getting to work was using shared methods and properties. So the dialogue is called dialogue 1.
Yeah.
You would say dialogue 1 display, and it would return an instance of that dialogue. But inside that, it has a shared property, whether it's been displayed or not. And if it's already on, it doesn't display itself.
Yeah.
And then to get rid of it, you say dialogue 1 dismiss.
I like
and
that.
Gets rid of the flag and closes
Right.
the dialogue instance, and you're out of here.
Right.
And in between, the caller can do whatever it wants, depending on whether it was okay or canceled.
Okay. I don't know how to re-explain that for the camera, but that sounds like a great idea. Anyways, I've been in software for 35 years, no big deal. I actually teach on leadership, on getting projects out the door on time. And I'm also, hey, have any of y'all heard of the Better Software magazine? Nobody? Well, we've got 90,000 subscribers, and it's free, and it's all about software techniques, and it's called Better Software. So I happen to be the editor on that thing, and we're always looking for authors. We don't do code examples or anything like that. It's all like all about the modern day things about DevOps and continuous integration and dealing with difficult employees, which I think some of you are qualified for, and stuff like that. Yeah, all right. Anyways, thank you all very much. I really appreciate you being here. Huh? Yeah. Xojo, the conference folks for the XDC are going to make that available. If not, there is on my website, Leading Software Maniacs, there is, if you go into the Xojo training thing, you can download it from there too. But they're going to make all these available at the end of the conference. Thank you.